Heat maps are a great way to visualize your data when you have a third data point that you want to display at the intersection of the X and the Y value. One of the most common solutions for generating heat maps is Apache Echarts, and today we're going to use it with AppScript to generate heat maps from our Google Sheets data. Let's check it out. All right, I've got this sample sales data set here, and you can see that there are repeating values for a given region on a given date. So the data has not been aggregated yet. First, I need to total it per region per date. And then for that total, that can be the intensity or the color shown at the intersection of that region and that date for the X and the Y. So let me show you what the finished chart looks like first, and then we're going to look at the eChart examples, figure out how to implement that in AppScript, and then I'll walk through how it actually works. First, I'm just going to run this function that opens up a modal using this heatmap HTML file here. So all this does is pull up the modal, and then the HTML file has all of the code to generate this chart here. You can see it's interactive, and as you hover on different data points, it's showing you more about that point and also where it falls in this range here. So let's look at the eCharts docs first, and I'll show you how it works in general, and then we'll actually implement eCharts, and I'll show you the code to generate this particular chart type. Now this is the eCharts example site. There are a ton of different chart types. The most basic one, this line chart here, we'll start with it. And you can see it's just this option object. It has a few different properties in here for the X and the Y axis, and then a series of data. But outside of that, the only thing that you need to render a chart is this option object, and then importing the library and telling it where to use this option object. If you look at the full code tab here, you can see the library is being imported now. They're defining the chart DOM as one of those elements, so getting it by its ID, and then just running eCharts init on that element. Once that's been ran, it's an empty chart, but it's an instance of a chart ready to receive some data. And so then you just run myChart.setOption and give it that option object. Now, every chart has a totally different structure for the option object. They can be pretty simple like this one, or we'll look at some of the other examples, and there's a lot more to it. But if you get the basics working, you can just swap out that option object and create the next chart type and the next type. So let's look at a heat map here at its option object. You can see that outside of the option object, there's a few things being defined first, and then the option object itself. So I'm going to use the same approach, taking these three types of variables for the X and the Y labels, and then the data that's going to get plotted over that XY area, and pass those three into a similar structure of an option object like this one. So first, what we'll do is get the most basic example working. If you go to their docs, to the handbook section here, and then to getting started, you'll see just an example of what you need to set up. You want to import the script, have some div with an ID that you can target, and then you give it that option object and run set option on that particular element. So you've got to select it, find it by its ID, and then just run that on it. So I'm going to copy this example here and put this in my script. So I've got the finished version here in the heatmap HTML. I'm going to start a new HTML file here and just call it index. And then I'm changing this function that opens the modal to look at that index file instead. And so if we save that, and I just put like a test here, we'll save that and rerun the function that opens that modal. And so now it's opening from my HTML file there. So then I'm going to replace this with that example from the docs. And the one thing I need to change here is we're not importing it from a local file. So I'm going to import it from content delivery network here, there's a link to JS Deliver. And if you open this up, you can copy the min.js link from right here. So I'm getting just that URL and import it right here. And then if we save that and rerun, reopen that, see what we get now. All right, so now Echarts is able to render a chart based on that option object that is inside of the HTML file here. And if I replace this with one of those other examples, then we'll get a totally different chart type. So right now we've got a bar chart. Go back to the examples here, and let's look at this pie chart. Okay, so here's the option object. I'm going to just copy all of that and paste it in place here. Okay, we'll save that and rerun the function. And now we have a totally different chart type. So it's pretty easy to get Echarts to load and to render something inside of AppScript using this modal. You can also do it in a sidebar, or you could publish it as a web app and have it in a full page with a do post or a do get rather. But that's the basics of getting the chart to render. So now we want to take the data from the spreadsheet and insert it into that format. Now, there's a little bit of JavaScript involved here, so I'm not going to walk through every step of writing it. I'll just show you the code that I use, and then I'll share this if anybody wants to get a copy. Let me collapse this. Let's see, here we go. So again, it's just importing the script. I've got a div that I'm calling chart, and then running that function on it to pass in the data. This uses the callback, where is it? With success handler. It's kind of a weird syntax. It takes a minute to get used to. But basically, you define a function that's step 2 that you would do after you have that data. And then here is step 1. So you get the sheet data. That's the part that's formatting it for this particular type of chart. You got this get sheet data function, and that's over here in the code.js file. So this function, let me just run this one so you can see the output. This is getting just the data, those 3 things that I need to pass in, which is the list of regions, the list of the actual sales data, and then the list of dates for the X and the Y labels. So the different pieces of this are you get the basics running, so it'll render something. And then you have to get a function that extracts those data points. And then back here to the heat map version, this function takes the option object here, and it's just inserting those things that I'm passing in. So from the get sheet data function, I'm giving it the dates, I'm giving it the regions and whatnot. And all those can be inserted here into the option object using the same format as that heat map from the example here. Now, the actual code to generate this part, this is where it's tricky. It's a little JavaScript heavy, and it's very specific to the data that you're starting with and the type of chart you're trying to go to. And every combination of your sheet and the next chart, it's going to be a little different. But in this case, the function I'm using, just to walk through it real quick, what I'm doing is defining an empty object, then going through each row, converting that date here first, and then just looking to see if I haven't logged this date yet, start out with an empty object. Otherwise, go to the sales map to that dot date and then into its region and just keep accumulating that value. So I'm adding whatever the sales were for that date, for that region, to what it currently is, and just initializing it to an empty object or 0 if it hasn't ran for that combo yet. Okay, and then I extract the unique list of dates, sorted, and then you can just map over those 2. So I've got a flat map here, which will take the date array, and then the index, and just map over those to put everything in that XY position. Like I said, it's a little tricky to kind of wrap your head around this notation, but the rest of it's pretty straightforward. This returns the right 3 sets of data that are needed to merge into this option object. And then here, that is the get sheet data being ran with this success handler. So this function defines that option object and then just inserts that data. It takes in the object with those 3 parameters, and then they just get used here in a couple different points where it's binding to those 3 pieces that were dynamic here. You can see it's the same approach. There's just 3 things getting passed in, and then that constructs your object for the option, and then you initialize it, and that's it. So it's pretty easy to get any one of these eCharts examples working in Google Apps Script. The trick is looking at your specific data and the exact format that whatever chart type you're working on, whatever format that that option object expects, that's where it's different in every case. And you just have to find the right formula, the right JavaScript function that'll transform the data to get you there.